Hello and welcome to another episode of Issuer Update. I'm your host, Dimitri Giller, and joining me today is Tim Gallagher, CEO of Royalties Inc., trading on the CSE under the ticker symbol RI. Tim, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for inviting us. Appreciate it.
To kick things off, can you introduce yourself, give us a quick overview of Royalties Inc., your vision, and what sets you apart in the capital market space?
Sure. So Royalties Inc. actually goes back to 2008 when it was a dedicated exploration company called Ex Tierra in Mexico. It focused on, in that era of 2008 to 2014, the silver market was on a roll. And over time, we learned about royalties. So we changed the name to Royalties Inc. And we want to focus on cash flowing royalties. So we vended in some music royalties, so we now have that as an asset, and then thirdly, because we're focused on cash flowing royalties of all types, we had acquired a 2% NSR on a piece of the Cozemin mine run by Capstone Copper. So essentially, we became an investment company rather than an active exploration company, and if you will, listed on the CSE in April 2023.
So let's talk royalties. What's the thesis behind building a diversified royalty library?
Well, the first thing I think is that all investors should appreciate that royalties as a business or as an investment are a de-risked version of the theme that they're trying to invest in. And it's obviously most evident with the gold royalty companies. Would you say, would you rather be invested in an operating company with all the issues, employees and permitting, or would you rather just take 2% off the revenue off the top, right? And, so Franco-Nevada versus Barrick kind of idea. And they've been phenomenally successful. So when it comes down to the idea of having royalties as an asset class, I think that's the first and most important thing, is that there's a whole group of companies, primarily on the Canadian exchanges as opposed to the rest of the world, because there's oil and gas royalties, there's drug royalties. There's business royalties, restaurant, pizza royalties, uranium royalties. So these are all de-risked models. And of course, it depends on the underlying asset that you're trying to get leverage on, or, typically in the case of a business royalty, the income. So that's first and foremost. I guess I would summarize it in saying we think that all investors should have 10% of their portfolio allocated to royalties as an asset class. And from there, decide how they want to allocate within that to, mining, oil and gas. And we discovered music royalties or entertainment royalties as the best of the bunch, primarily because of their longevity. So copyright law takes them from patent limited life of 17 years or mine life of 10 or 15 years to an extraordinary 100+ years on the internet, which is essentially forever. So I don't think there's any investment or any business or asset that has those attributes.
So you've made a number of strategic moves in the music space, most recently increasing your stake in Music Royalties Inc., or MRI. Can you tell us about the deal and why you see music royalties as such an attractive asset in the class?
Well, the first thing about music royalties is this disconnect between, as consumers, we know all the hit content, right? And it stays with us for life. So whether it's a 60-year-old song or a recent song, those are played everywhere all the time. And so it's something that we actually know, but didn't know you could own. And nobody's created an investable portfolio. There's no public music royalty company, but you can essentially, compliments of a technology, you can actually reach out and get a piece of your favorite song, band, artist. It's a very fragmented business, but historically there was no market, except for perhaps some of the biggest deals you might have seen in the newspaper. But the reality is that, even in Canada, SOCAN, Society of Composers and Authors, which is a performing rights organization, pays out a staggering $500 million to a couple 100,000 rights holders. And of course, nobody knows anything about that unless they happen to be in the entertainment or music business. So we're trying to bring that idea, that logic, into something that nobody owns. So we know it, we don't own it, and we've converted that into a portfolio over the last 7 years of 31 catalogs. So we raised 30 million privately for Music Royalties Inc. We initiated a dividend in 2019. So, we've now paid out over $12 million in dividend that's coming from the streaming income from the leading players, primarily, call it Spotify, YouTube, Apple, TikTok, and so on. So it's billions of dollars in cash flow that nobody really appreciates. They appreciate the song, but they didn't realize they could have it going into their bank account.
Let's switch gears to mining. You've also monetized a 2% NSR in Capstone copper mine in Mexico, as you mentioned. That's a producing asset. What kind of value does that stream bring to the company?
Well, currently it's basically been in dispute since we acquired it. So we bought it back in 2019 when, following our success with Metalla royalty and streaming, we were trying to use the X-Hera vehicle to acquire these things. And, subsequently, Cozamin put this area into production. And so unfortunately, they transferred it to themselves, without notifying the owner that we bought the majority control of. So, we've had to litigate it. And we just reached a verdict through the Zacatecas court, which is a state in Mexico, supporting us. And they've been ordered to pay, on this royalty. They've been paying two other royalty holders, one called Grupo Basis, the original owner of the mine, over $3 million a year US, which is a pretty amazing number. When you think about what they're worth in the Canadian context, these companies trade at a 1% dividend yield. So that, as an additional amount to a big company is worth 300 million. So a second 1% NSR to the south of us is owned by Gold Royalty Corp. They got about 1.25 million US last year. So we have a property, if you will, that has a royalty in between on strike. So we're just trying to, bring this to a settlement with Capstone. And the remarkable thing about this is when we did this acquisition of the 2% NSR, Capstone was a 200 million market cap company, a 50-cent stock with 200 million in debt. It's now a $6 billion company because it's focused since then on these world-class Chilean assets. So it's a pretty interesting situation because it's really, really hard to find a cash flowing royalty, in the mining business. Most of the new royalty companies that are out there over the last few years, and even the big ones, have developmental assets. So that's why settling with Capstone, would be, and our claim and our valuation is that it's 25 million would be a massive impact on the Royalties Inc. upside.
Okay, so let's switch gears again into strategic capital moves. Earlier this year, you raised capital internationally through a private placement with insiders, and you've also cleaned up your US settlement process with DTC eligibility. What does that say about your leadership's confidence and your strategy to grow the shareholder base?
First and foremost, we virtually had no shareholders in the US, even though we had a symbol, ROYIF, for a while. So, since we went through those steps that you mentioned, DTC eligibility, and then subsequently listing in the OTC markets under their qualification standards, we've actually seen trading that we've never seen before. And especially, I guess, compliments of the landmark, legal victory in June. So when it comes down to both strategies, the idea that we have an underlying silver asset, in the mining and the potential royalty payout from Capstone, as well as music fans in the US, then they're ultimately a target market. I mean, when you put it in pure music terms, half the industry historically has been in the US. The technology market is the US. The ones that enabled that business are essentially the technology companies. So really, as you know, no other place on the planet has a retail market like North America for stocks, right? So if we can connect the dots and get a few of those hundreds of millions of music fans, to buy shares, then that's ultimately the payoff for a premium. Because as I said before, there's no public music royalty company.
Okay, so let's zoom out and look at the big picture. Where do you see the company heading over the next 12 to 24 months?
Well, we are a non-correlated alternative investment. So when it comes down to the normal influences of operations or, interest rates, economy, wars, that's not really, affecting us. I mean, perhaps related to the upside of silver, which we think is also a once in a lifetime asset. It's undervalued. It's used. In fact, it's 5 years in deficit. There's so many fundamentals on the silver side. We've been waiting over a decade, as the market has, for silver to pick up again, and it's aligned in my mind to break through its historical high of $50, both in 1980 and April 2011, and go far beyond that, in part due to the rise in the gold price. So we're at the start line for that thesis, which I think takes us well over $100, certainly in the last 4 years of this decade, not unlike what it did in the late 70s. But the fundamental uses of silver are a catalyst, right? So, in solar, unfortunately, in all those missiles around the world, green technology, AI centers is a big thing now, right? So copper and silver, which ties into our Cozeman royalty, makes it, a unique investment. The litigation, good markets and bad, lawyers are suing each other. So the litigation upside of that, for the Cozeman situation, and of course, good markets and bad, everybody's listening to music, right? So, it's a non-correlated, 3 asset company. Each has its own trajectory, but each has a merit that will, significantly increase the value of Royalties Inc.
Great. Tim, thanks again for joining us and sharing the story behind Royalties Inc., from mining to music and passive income. For more information on Royalties Inc., please visit the CSE.com under the ticker symbol RI. Thank you and take care.
Much appreciated.